So we move on now to the very heart of today's session with the 4 talks of this afternoon, that is Professor Loprieno, Professor Amatos, Professor Padua-Schioppas, and Professor Zagrebelski. Anyway, this session will be chaired by Professor Profumo, and he will himself introduce the speakers. I remember only that Professor Profumo is the president of the Compagnia di San Paolo, a banking foundation which supports financially the ordinary activity of our academy and hence indirectly this conference as well. I take this opportunity to thank him for both. We will take now a break of a couple of minutes to change our scenery. I thank you very much. Thank you. Once again, and I call Professor Profumo to the presidency table.
The break was very short, only 2 minutes, not more than it. First of all, thank you to be here today. This is a very special occasion for Torino and for Accademia delle Scienze, and I'm very pleased with Professor Antonio Loprieno. He's the president of the ALLEA Association, and I'm also very pleased that all of you have the chance to spend 1 day and a half discussing about the role of the academies in Europe and in this really difficult time, not only for Europe but for the world in general. This first session is without any title, but yesterday when I was looking the papers, I was saying maybe a possible title is The Academies and the Society, in the sense that looking the title of the 4 talks of today, we have 4 important words that I wanted to remember. First of all, values. The second, identity. The third, interdisciplinary. And the last one, human rights. And this will be the rouge fill that is going to link the 4 talks of today afternoon. First of all, I want to briefly introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is Professor Antonio Loprieno, that is a professor in Switzerland, and is also the president of ALLEA. And the title of this talk is ALLEA and European Values. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, can you hear? Oh. Should I sit? No, I can stand. That's very good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, President, distinguished colleagues. Thank you very much for inviting me to say a couple of words of the role of our network in the debate on the role of academies in present-day Europe, and especially for inviting me to do this in the Accademia delle Scienze di Torino, of which I am a proud member, and in the presence of so many scholars of the university in which I've studied, the University of Turin, and particularly of one person that meant so much in my own development as an individual and as a scholar, Professor Fabrizio Pennacchietti, who is also here and a member of this distinguished academy. So that's good. What I would like to do with you today in the next 20 minutes is to take you on a journey of the role of academies, of academia, this Latin word, in forging European intellectual and scholarly landscape the way we know it. And I will start with a picture, of course, from the best of all European universities, the University of Basel, and after the University of Turin, of course, number 2. But I will start with spending a couple of words on the meaning of the connection between academia and the institution that is frequently called with the name of academia and that has personified, at least in the first part of the historical development, the academic role, which is the university. What is frequently misunderstood in present-day Europe and in present-day discussions is that the university, the European university, when it was conceived, it was not a place of research. It was actually a place of instruction, a place of magisterium, right? So in which actually the faculties that counted, the higher faculty, which in continental Europe are still called the hohen Fakultäten, were the faculties connected with a practical activity, theology, law, and medicine. And what we now call university or research actually derives from the preparation to the real thing, to the real study of a professional activity. The second feature and this connection with somehow a practical dimension is something that remains to a certain extent in the DNA of academia, as we will say. A second dimension that remains in the DNA of academia is the internationalism, the international perspective. In the medieval and early modern academia / university, there was no national boundary, but all universities were by definition enjoyed by definition an academic status of independence. And third point, the fact that through this particular combination of instruction and connection with the real world of true jobs, the academy is contributing to the formation of European values, of what we now call European values. A first break, if you will, between the two meaning of academic in the sense of connected with university, and academic in the sense of connected with academies, took place in the 16th and between the 16th and the 18th century, in which, in fact, a dichotomy developed between universities as places of instruction and learned societies that were just reserved to the discussion or to the development of knowledge. So the loss of the educational function of the academia is connected with this particular development. The second dimension that took place in this time span is the national orientation that emerged. So the academy as an institution that plays a role in the development of a national agenda, and the Académie Française is probably the most representative example of this development. This turn to the national perspective also favored the role of academies in terms of educational policies, in terms of directing a political function of academies. Now, in the wake of the Reformation, universities lost attractivity. They became confessional institutions on both sides of the confessional divide, both on the Roman Catholic and on the Reformed Protestant side. They adopted a more theological perspective, which means that in the early Enlightenment, empirical research, the discovery of empirical research to the advantage of the magisterium, was something for which a new institution was actually created, and that's what we now call the academies in the modern sense. The distinguished academy that hosts us today, and other examples such as the Berlin Academy, the original Königliche Preußische Akademie der Wissenschaften, the Austrian Academy of Sciences. So between the 18th and the 19th century, academies became the carriers of production of science. And that was the result of the loss of this function on the side of the universities. Now, the moment of the university, the big development of a more modern university took place in the 19th century. And in the 19th century, it's not the university that, as we know it, that actually developed, but rather the universities, three very different models of what higher education should be about. The one model, which is typical for continental Europe, to a certain extent also for Italy, is what we call the Humboldt model. And that is a model in which academic basically means disciplinary. The quintessence of academic knowledge is a disciplinary knowledge. There is only one language in which there is the word Fachgebiet, and that's German. It's not by chance. And that also gives you the idea of pillars, as it were, of knowledge organized into pillars that the university was asked to teach, to inform, and that academies were asked to produce in terms of particular results. This model is completely different from the model that prevailed in the Anglo-Saxon system, which is not based on disciplines, not based on science, but based on education, based on the idea of citizenship. That is, what the university does is primarily to build an elite that functions as societal supporter. And in a third model, which is very strong in post-Napoleonic France, to a certain extent it was adopted in Switzerland. This function, the prototypical university, is the School of Engineering, is the school that prepares to a productive profession within the state, all right? And these three different models of university had also three different degrees that were automatically connected with them. The doctorate in the Humboldt tradition, the BA, MA, PhD sequence in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, and the diploma, the professional diploma in France and in Switzerland. Now, if this presentation would have taken place 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when ALLEA was founded, we would be in a situation that would be pretty much described by what I've said so far. So, academies for the production of high-level knowledge, universities in different forms in the different countries of our continent with a kind of orientation towards science, towards citizenship, or towards professional distinction. Around 2000, a major change took again place in the European intellectual landscape. And this is a change that actually separated universities from academies. And that created, to a certain extent, the basis of what we have now, of the situation of what we have now. And the reason is that the universities changed their role dramatically and lost, if you will, in our continent, the distinctive features that had been theirs since the 19th century. The development of a European higher education area, what we call the Bologna reform, and all these different steps are manifestations of this dramatic change. And this dramatic change transformed the university along three quite different axes. The first is the axis of governance. The universities became autonomous institutions. From being arms of the state, of their respective state, small state in the case of the German Empire, large states in the case of Great Britain or France, nonetheless of expressions of national states, the European universities became autonomous institutions. So they replaced what was a typical mission statement in which basically all universities were asked to produce the same, to structures that had their own specific, unique selling point that they were asked to transmit. The second is the organizational level. European universities, until 20 years ago, were organized in disciplines, were organized in institutes, in departments, in faculties. And this distribution has now lost its significance from the point of view of the management of the university. The universities have become a coherent and cohesive institution with their own autonomous strategy. So it's not a primarily perspective from the point of view of the discipline, but primarily perspective from the point of view of the institution. And the third is the administration. An autonomous institution is measured also on the basis of its efficiency, because of course the carrier of the universities, be it the state in the case of state institutions, be it private sponsors in the case of private institutions, doesn't really change. They also want a certain degree of efficiency to be used with their own money. So you see, European universities have changed dramatically along these three axes. European academies have not changed along these three major axes. So they have reacted more slowly, if you will, to the transformation that has taken place in the European academic landscape. When I say conservative or progressive, I'm not judging, of course. Yeah? I'm just describing, as a cultural historian, what the developments that have taken place. Now, what has happened in the last 20 years has been, if you will, incremented, has been dramatically increased, has been accelerated over the last 5 to 10 years. And over the last 5 to 10 years, there have been challenges facing our knowledge societies on the whole that our academies are particularly exposed to. I list here three major changes that have been typical for the last years and that are typical of this time, of these critical times that we are living right now, and that have been described as times of crisis in the title of this conference. And they are marked by three changes. A change in attitude to knowledge. Our knowledge, the knowledge of the majority, you are all much younger than me, but let's say those of my generation, the pre-internet generation, knowledge was an individual matter. From the Reformation on, from the book print, knowledge is gained by reading a book that has one author, and that is responsible for the contents of that book. Be this author God, but one personal author. This type of access to knowledge is changing dramatically. Our contemporary knowledge is not individual knowledge, it's a social knowledge. It's a knowledge that is transmitted by a community of more or less informed individuals. Wikipedia does not have one author. It has 50, 60 authors that contribute to this development, which means for our academies that it is mandatory to embrace the social dimension of knowledge in our activity as scientists, which means embracing science communication and open access type of publication. These are the ways in which we can respond to the passage from to the transition from individual to social knowledge. The second transition has to deal with a polarization that has taken place in the political life of our continent and indeed of our world, that has replaced ideological with identitarian type of discourses. And in this type of transition, there is a very nice dichotomy that, by the way, was discussed in one of the versions of this conference here, the one in Göttingen, and an English sociologist by the name of David Goodert made a very nice distinction between anywheres and somewheres. And anywheres are people who can live anywhere, right? Because who embrace, as it were, the values of globalization. And somewheres are those who can only be, who read their world as being part of one particular context. So we would say the globalization's losers in a very critical way. So in this type of dichotomy, I think it is mandatory for European academies to defend the values of the Enlightenment, because the identitarian drift is something that jeopardizes precisely this type of enlightened culture, enlightened values, that represents the basis of scientific developments. The third evolution concerns the role of research. We are now in a very peculiar situation in which, in the moment of the history of humankind, in which the highest level of research precision has been reached, we also have the highest level of distrust in science in terms of political discourse. This is a bizarre finding and a bizarre contradiction. And that is, of course, due to the fact that in the transmission of social knowledge is far more rapid and less controlled by quality values than the transmission of individual knowledge. So we need, as academies, to adjust to this transition. And the way in which we think at ALLEA that you can adjust to this transition is to, so referring to what we might call frames of reference. That is, not just providing punctual information, not just providing the punctual result of a scientific experiment, but rather framing this into a discourse that allows also a broader access. Because, as you know, with individual, specific, punctual scientific research, you can do whatever you want, and you can be very, you can also spread fake news by using curves or results of experiments that are per se correct, but that acquire a significance only if you place them within a reference, within a general frame. And in this respect, a role, and this is what I write here at the end, the role, a core function of academy is providing orientation to younger generations of scholars. So that is transmitting precisely this RAM, this frame, right, within which you can make sense out of science and of scholarship, and not just transmit punctually the levels of scholarship. In this respect, ALLEA, for example, favors very much the development of young academies in the different members. And there are some very luminous examples of these young academies in the German academic world, the Junge Akademie, in the Austrian, the Junge Kurie, in Great Britain. And we very much encourage our members to reach out to younger generation scholars and creating some kind of bridge between the academies of old men with white beard like myself and the academies of younger men or women, that also have a different approach. So my conclusions are to if you want to summarize this very cursory history of academies that I try to share with you, there are two needs that emerge as significant. The first is for academies to be less self-centered and more open to dialogue with society. So this is also a way for academies to develop a unique selling proposition. Universities are there to teach. We as academies are there to transmit the production of knowledge in terms of an interaction with knowledge societies. And the second one is to contextualize science, to support what our president referred to as the transdisciplinary or the interdisciplinary component of the academies, in which academies are the instruments in order to provide hermeneutic frames to interpret the ever-increasing amount of specific bits of information or pieces of information that can only make sense and be used also at the political level and in social and in civil society if we know how to frame them. Thank you very much for your attention.